Dad walked in on me with a girl. I had always known my dad as a kind, caring man, someone who tried his best to provide for our family. He had strong values and a deep religious upbringing that shaped how we were raised. Throughout my childhood, we never talked much about sex. It was a subject that hovered in the background, heavily implied to be off-limits until marriage. There were no casual mentions of dating habits or discussions of intimacy, just a silent understanding. Sex belonged far into the future, after vows were exchanged and a home was built. As a kid, I never really questioned it. I just accepted that this was how our household worked. But as I grew older, I started to drift away from church, explore my own beliefs, and eventually left behind many of the strict guidelines that had structured my youth. Fast forward several years. I had spent the last 5 years out on my own. During that time, I learned what it meant to be independent. I rented my own place, worked full-time, and, yes, developed my own approach to relationships and sex. I no longer felt compelled to wait until marriage. I dated freely, learned about what I liked, and understood who I was outside of the expectations I grew up with. Eventually, circumstances changed, and I decided to move back in with my parents temporarily. They were gracious enough to let me stay while I got on my feet financially again. My dad, always eager to help with something practical, set up a workshop area for me outside. We lived on a property that had a large separate workshop building, and inside it he gave me a little corner for my own use, my room, within a larger structure. It was essentially a sectioned-off area with walls on some sides, and just a heavy blanket acting as a makeshift door. It offered privacy, although not perfect soundproofing or full security. The space was cozy in its own way. I had my bed, a desk, a few of my personal items. At night, I would sometimes stay up listening to music, scrolling on my phone, or reading by lamplight. It felt separate enough from the main house that I could come and go without disturbing anyone. My dad would occasionally come into the main workshop early in the morning or late at night to grab tools or work on small projects. Usually I could hear him enter. There was a telltale squeak when the door opened. That sound was my warning, my cue to be mindful of what I was doing. But that particular morning, everything went wrong, and it set off a chain of events that still makes me cringe when I think about it. It happened around 6 in the morning. I had plans to work an early shift, so I woke up before dawn. The night before, I had a girl over, someone I had been seeing casually. She was fun, easygoing, and we both enjoyed each other's company. We ended up sleeping together in my little makeshift room. The night passed comfortably. The two of us curled up under a blanket, talking quietly until we drifted off. When the alarm woke me up that morning, I decided to make the most of the few minutes I had before actually getting dressed and heading inside for breakfast. We started kissing. One thing led to another, and pretty soon we were making out, both completely naked. She stood in front of me, and I reached out to her. The moment felt intimate, warm, like the world was just us two. Normally, I would have heard the door to the main workshop squeak if my dad came in, but I had turned some music on softly, more as a comforting background than anything else. Because of that, I missed my usual signal. Before I knew it, the heavy blanket that separated my private nook from the rest of the workshop was lifted. In the blink of an eye, I saw my dad's face appear, and the shock and confusion in his eyes. At that same instant, the girl was literally stroking me. We were both completely naked, fully exposed. My dad froze. His expression went from bewildered to horrified as he realized what he was seeing. I could see his eyes darting between the two of us, trying to process the situation. Those few seconds felt like an eternity. The kind of slow-motion moment you read about but never imagine happening to you. I stood there, caught in the most humiliating position possible, and the girl I was with also froze, clearly unsure what to do. The world narrowed down to that tiny space, the rustle of the blanket, and my dad's stunned gaze. After what couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 seconds, still far too long, he dropped the blanket. His face contorted into a mix of disbelief and frustration. "I will talk to you later," he managed to say, his voice tense and cracked. I could sense the effort it took him to hold back a range of emotions, from anger to sadness to embarrassment. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing in the main workshop area as he walked away, leaving me and my companion in a silence thick with mortification. I turned to her, trying to reassure her that everything would be all right. She was shaken up, of course, but to her credit, she handled it better than I could have expected. We talked quietly, both of us still reeling from the shock. I apologized that she had to be part of such an awkward, deeply personal family moment. She left soon after, and I was left alone with my thoughts, feeling a kind of uneasy dread about what would happen next. When I finally gathered the courage to go inside the main house, I saw my dad at the kitchen table. His entire demeanor had changed. He refused to even look at me. I had never felt so exposed. Not just physically, but emotionally. Growing up in a home where sex was taboo and modesty was paramount, I never imagined being caught like this. Especially not by my father, the strict figure who had always tried to guide us along a morally upright path. He wore a look of deep disappointment and confusion. It wasn't just that he saw me naked and in a sexual act. He had glimpsed a world he probably never wanted to know existed. My adult sexual identity, formed outside the rules he had always endorsed. The tension in the house was immediate and palpable. Every time I moved from one room to another, passing by where he stood, I felt a knot in my stomach. 6 excruciating hours passed, during which we didn't exchange a single word. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken emotion. I felt guilty, embarrassed, and, at the same time, a bit resentful. I understood his shock, but I was also an adult now. I had a right to privacy even if I was living under his roof for a time. It wasn't just about the religious background or the fact that we never talked about sex. It was about basic respect for someone's personal space. Had he knocked? Had he given me any warning? None of this would have happened. I kept replaying it in my mind, imagining a scenario where I heard the door squeak and quickly covered up, or where he announced himself before barging in. To make matters even more complicated, that very same day, my dad walked in on my brother using the bathroom without knocking first. He opened the door to find my brother sitting on the toilet, startled and upset. If my dad's morning had started in embarrassment and shock, it continued in this bizarre series of intrusions that were clearly not sitting well with anyone involved. By now, my dad must have realized that his lack of knocking had gone from a quirk or oversight to a real problem causing emotional distress. I had plans to go out later that day, and my father was scheduled to leave on a business trip for 3 days. The idea of leaving things as they were, with this thick tension and unresolved discomfort, didn't sit well with me. I couldn't bear the thought of him traveling with that weight on his shoulders, and me wandering around feeling guilty and ashamed. We had to clear the air, even if it would be awkward. I decided to postpone my plans for a bit and face the issue head on. I found him before he left, and I asked if we could talk. He looked at me, finally making eye contact, but his expression was still guarded. I started by saying that I was sorry he had to see what he did. I told him I understood how shocking and disturbing it must have been. It wasn't something any parent wants to witness. I acknowledged that we never talked about these things openly, which made it all the more uncomfortable. But then I also asserted my position. I was an adult now, not a teenager who needed scolding. Regardless of our religious differences or his personal views, I needed some basic respect for my privacy. I pointed out that he had walked in on not only me in a compromising position, but also on my brother in the bathroom. These situations could have been easily avoided by simply knocking. The fact that he always just walked into spaces as if he owned them made sense when we were children, but not now, not when we were grown-ups with our own boundaries. My dad listened, and though his face remained somewhat stern, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. The silence between my sentences was heavy, but he didn't storm off or interrupt. I continued, explaining that while I was living under his roof, I respected his rules, but I also deserved to have a space where I didn't feel constantly on guard. What happened that morning wasn't just embarrassing. It was invasive. I tried to say this calmly, without raising my voice or making accusations. I just wanted him to see that while I regretted his accidental discovery of my sex life, I also felt that his refusal to respect personal boundaries had led us here. Eventually, he nodded slowly. He didn't say much. My dad has never been great at talking about feelings, but he agreed that from now on he would knock. I could sense that this had affected him too. On one hand, he had to confront the fact that his son was sexually active, and that it wasn't within the moral framework he would have preferred. On the other hand, he realized that the world had moved on from when we were little kids. We weren't children running around the house in footed pajamas anymore. I think he recognized that his behavior needed adjusting. After that conversation, he left for his business trip. I felt a subtle shift in the air. It wasn't complete resolution. I doubted we would ever have a heart-to-heart about sex and relationships, but it was enough to dispel the immediate tension. Over time, I noticed changes. If I was in my workshop area, he'd call out my name or lightly knock on the side of the door before entering. In the main house, I heard the gentle rap of his knuckles on the bathroom door before he turned the handle. We never revisited the topic directly. In a family that avoids talking about sex and intimacy, This was as close to a resolution as we were likely to get. I think on some level my dad learned that I was truly an adult now, and that meant respecting my autonomy. For my part, I learned a lesson about living under someone else's roof. It's always good to set boundaries and expectations clearly, even if it feels awkward. Maybe I should have told him from day one, "Hey, when I'm in the workshop, could you let me know before coming in?" Still, what happened happened. I can't undo the memory of my dad's face as he lifted that blanket and saw something no father wants to see. But time has passed, and we've moved on in our own quiet way. The embarrassment has faded into a strange family story, one that we'll probably never tell anyone else, but which remains a silent lesson etched into the back of our minds. He learned to knock. I learned to be more mindful. And we both learned that respecting privacy goes a long way toward maintaining peace under the same roof. In the end, our relationship survived the incident. My dad might still be uncomfortable with the idea of me being sexually active before marriage, but he knows I'm my own person. I know he cares, and I know he would rather live in a world where he never has to think about these things. But life doesn't always give us that luxury. Sometimes we walk through a door, lift a blanket, and discover truths we weren't ready to face. The best we can do is learn, apologize where needed, and move forward with a bit more understanding and respect.